Hello everybody and welcome to another Hidden Treasures tutorial. In this video we're going to be enabling our static sites with search powered by Algolia. I'm pretty sure that's not how you pronounce it, but that's how I read it, and that's what I'm going to roll with. Feel free to correct me if you know that there's a correct pronunciation. I don't, but that's what we're going to do. So the use case here is I have a content managed static site. That in itself is a very fascinating topic, but I already have a real world project that I'm working on, and we're going to use that to do a walkthrough of how I can enable rich text, full text search for this static site where we have no database, we have no backend, certainly not one that's closely coupled to generating our web pages. It's an entirely kind of new methodology for doing this, and we're going to dive into that in this video. So there's a few steps to this process. In the first instance, I'm going to introduce the project itself. Like I said, it's a real world project, therefore it has some real world quirks, decisions I've taken in terms of things I'm using in the project, templating languages, things like that. I'll introduce that. Then we're going to go ahead and work through install dependencies for Algolia. We're going to implement in our JavaScript and our markup the Algolia search. Then I'm going to show you how we gather our content up together, and in this case, this is a use case where we're using a headless CMS to actually manage our content. And then finally, we're going to actually make that index and tweak some settings so that the search is available to our site. So that's basically the goal, and that's what we're going to run through. Okay, and this is the project. So I'm working on the Chisel documentation, the stack. It's basically a static site integrated with Chisel, which provides the content via Chisel, our headless CMS, and the site's built with our tool Hammer, and it's actually, I'm serving it locally here using our tool Anvil. So it's really a case of eating my own dog food, so to speak, but shows you a really quite neat example of actually what Beach's tools do when they're all used together. This is a great example. So as you can see, I already have all these pages pulling in from Chisel into the site. And there's a few things to talk about in terms of how I've actually built this site, just because I don't want to confuse you. It probably would have been easier to create this tutorial using a bunch of kind of plain HTML markup, but actually for this project and my own personal preference, I quite like using the Slim templating language. It's something that people who are particularly working with like Ruby and Rails and building views in Rails will often use the Slim templating language. So as I said, I'm using Hammer. You're going to see a lot of Slim templates that look a bit different. Personally, I prefer them. They're a lot cleaner and more succinct than straight up HTML. And Hammer takes care of converting those Slim templates to HTML. You'll also see that I'm using CoffeeScript instead of JavaScript. Don't really know why, to be honest. It was just a habit I kind of got into, and I have that. So we'll be writing our JavaScript in CoffeeScript, but I'll kind of show you, that there's not that much difference between the two, and it's not a big implementation. So there's just a couple of things to kind of be aware of. And then you might see these kind of Hammer tags. This is Hammer specific syntax, which is just the standard HTML syntax, but it works inside our Slim templates as well. And you can actually use these interchangeably with the Slim specific syntax for the Hammer tags as well, which we also have. And sometimes I use these interchangeably. It just depends how kind of old the project is, or who's worked on it, or whatever. So not great for consistency to have different versions, but you might see both of these. So anyway, that's kind of an introduction to sort of the code itself. In terms of the user interface, what I've done is created a small snippet of HTML, so just so it's clear. And this is another thing, you can use HTML and Slim interchangeably inside of Hammer. Hammer handles all of that for us. So just to make it sort of a little bit easier, I've created this search modal path partial that we will work with to implement the search into, just so it's nicely kind of contained. So we'll update this markup. And then the final thing I wanted to sort of just introduce was the role of Chisel in terms of the content. So you can see here I've got a couple of content models set up inside of my site in Chisel. I'm running Chisel locally, so you're also getting a bit of a preview of the new sort of refreshed UI that we've been working on for Chisel. So I have a document and a section model set up for this particular documentation. So it's a very simple custom content model. We take a look inside the actual document model. You see title, summary, body, slug, code block, console output. These are my fields. And I also have a section as well, which contains a title, an array of documents, which is basically the relationship between my documents and then the groupings of those documents, and then an index, which is used for ordering. And these are my content entries. So these are all instances of documents that I've created. Some have just got placeholder content because I'm still working through kind of writing out that documentation, and perhaps if I can find one with a bit more content in, so you can see, we use the body section to write markdown and add all our content, and we have this like code block, which if you look in here, all of the content for this like particularly styled like components, all again provided by the CMS integration, all at build time through Hammer. So this is kind of the structure of our existing project, like pre-search. I've just included this input field at the top here, which for now is just a kind of placeholder for what we're going to use. And the job is basically all of this content that you see down the left-hand side, all of these documents, we're going to want that search to take an input, a query into an input field, and then return us more relevant filtered results based on that query. And as you can see right now, it's completely inactive. I can type in here, nothing happens. This is purely just a kind of UI container that we're going to then implement and enable our search feature within. So let's go ahead and do that. And so that completes kind of step one. The next step in our process is to actually dive in and head over to Algolia and install the dependencies that we need to implement Algolia into our site. So I've got the Algolia dashboard and documentation open here. Now, I have implemented this before, and to be honest, every time I come back to the Algolia site, I think I find a different section of documentation. Not sure how. I think the first time was kind of a walkthrough. I don't really know, to be honest. So these include tags, though, seem to be different to the ones I had before. Well, for the purposes of this, let's go with the documentation we have before us. These were the ones that I had before. They look a bit different. There's like one JavaScript include and then a couple of style sheets. So let's try and think kind of the best way to handle this. Well, the first thing I think I'll do is I'll just create a new partition inside my Hammer project so we can just kind of keep this stuff contained into a small file. And if we just have a quick look and compare, the two set of includes, just see if there's any major kind of differences between them. So these are the current ones from the documentation. It looks like, I don't know, it's weird. Instant search is a bit more up to date in my previous example, but the I don't know, we have the Algolia. So I don't know which one's the most up to date. Let's go with the documentation. I'm going to leave these two style sheet includes in here as well, and then just hope that all of this kind of works together. Maybe we'll have some issues, maybe we won't. Who knows? Let's just give it a try. So I've created this partial. got all of our includes in here. And so now I'm just going to include this using a hammer tag inside my head. So it's quite easy. It's very easy just to remove like this one tag from my head. Very easy to dive in and edit the Algolia kind of libraries and stuff. It's not all mixed in together. And so that can sort of completes the install dependency step. We'll move on to step 3, which is now we get into the actual instant search implementation. And for this, we're going to need to write a little bit of JavaScript. Fortunately, they give us a nice little helping hand. Again, this is a slightly different syntax to how I did it previously, but anyway, let's roll with it and see what happens. I guess it's related to their libraries. And for this, so as I mentioned earlier, I wrote I have my app main kind of JavaScript file actually written in CoffeeScript, but that's fine. The syntax is a little bit different. Hammer handles, compiling that out to JavaScript at build time. But for the purposes of this, I've just grabbed this JavaScript snippet. So let's make use of a CoffeeScript, a JavaScript to CoffeeScript converter, which we have here. I can just paste this in here. On the left, my JavaScript, and on the right will be my CoffeeScript. So that all kind of looks okay. Yeah, it looks like, the Algolia search library connects to the back end, and then the instant search uses that Algolia search to kind of combine them together. It looks like what I was using before is actually a more recent version where they basically migrated that all to a single library. But again, let's follow the documentation for now. We can always update that easy enough later. So if I paste my CoffeeScript in here, this is the basic implementation. There's a few things that we now need to update for our own specific case. So the actual connection to the Algolia service, we need the credentials, and then we need to update the name of the index to match the name of our own index in this example. And then finally, you see that using a couple of UI, these widgets, helpers, and they require a couple of IDs to exist in our markup. So we're going to go ahead and add them, and that should basically tie all the pieces together. So I'm going to head back over to the Algolia dashboard, click on the Indices menu item. And as you can see, I've already got an index created. If you created your Algolia account, you've probably already got one as well. You might need to change the name of it to something more relevant. If you did the walkthrough tutorial thing, it probably would have created one for you. So anyway, name it something, but then ultimately we just need to grab that name and update the index name here, like so. And let's also go ahead and grab our API keys and the app ID. The first parameter is the app ID. The second is the API key. I just have mine to the side, but you can grab yours here in the dashboard. Basically, I'll refresh these shortly. So yeah, so that should wire us up now to the back end. The final steps really for us now is to actually integrate this into our user interface. So for this, we need to open up the search modal, and you can actually see here that I've already got a search box ID on my input element. It's slightly different case formatting, so I'm going to use the one that I have in here already. So we'll update that in app.coffee, and then I'm going to jump in and just below the form inside the modal body content, I'm going to add an empty div with the ID of hit. So that should wire that up to our instant search widget, our hits widget, which will be there to display our search results. And at this point, we've got everything wired up. But as you can see, if I head back to the site and give it a try, it's still not working fully. So the actual boilerplate code was not quite enough to get a working implementation. As you can see, there's no errors, no related errors anyway, to the search. There's nothing wrong with the actual JavaScript implementation. We just haven't quite done enough. So what I know from experience is that in addition to the container, what I need to do is also decide how I want that content, how I want those results to be presented inside of this widget. So I'm going to need to add some additional parameters to the hits method on the widget, and we can do that quite easily here. Now, the main one I need is called templates, and then in here we're going to define the actual markup that represents each hit item. Okay, so I'm just going to write templates takes an object, and inside of here I'm going to handle the empty case. So if there's no results, it'll just return an empty string, and if it has an item, then each item will be represented by this markup. So I'm going to have an anchor tag, and I've already got some predefined kind of styles for this, and classes kind of set up in my CSS. So we'll just use those. And then for the link, this is great. This is a dynamic attribute. I want this to be pulled from my content, where I have a field in Chisel in my document model called slug, which is they're designed to generate the actual URL of the page itself. So we'll use that for the href on this link tag, and that's it. We can basically close this tag, and inside that we are going to just add a title tag, or a heading tag, sorry, and we'll pass that the title of our post. So you can see here we're using this template syntax, this double curly braces, which is like a handlebars or mustache template language, which works with Algolia instant search library. So this is what we use. And we have access to our content fields in here. So like slug, title, summary, body. I'm going to show you in a minute how to ensure that those fields are available, because again, there's a little gotcha there. And basically, this should now be sufficient for us to test. So if we head back into our Chisel site, give it a little refresh, and now you can see when I click on the input, it's by default pulling all of the content that I've passed, that I've got in Algolia, into here. So it's rendering my hits. If I type in the search box, you can see with every key down event or key up event, I don't know what triggers it, but it's dynamically filtering that list according to the search. So it's working basically, but you won't actually have this in your project by default, because right now I've actually got some content in Algolia which is indexed, and you can see here that the URL, the link is working nicely. It's generated the URL that's the same as the URL that's generated by Hammer when it builds the project from Chisel. So everything's kind of tied together quite nicely, and is working as intended. But we need to now kind of take a step back and actually clear out the content that we have in Algolia, which moves us on to we've done step 3. We're going to move on to step 4, which is about actually how do we gather that content firstly, and then how do we bring that into Algolia. So if I head back into the indices, and this is the content browser. You can see that I've already got content down here. I'm going to clear this out right now. So we'll start from fresh, if I can spell. We'll clear that out, and you can see I've got no records now in here. So again, if I pop back to the chisel site, give that a refresh. Give that a proper refresh and open up. Now you can see there's no content available because there's no records being indexed. Nothing works here, so we're going to need to fix that. So back in Algolia, there's a few ways that we can actually upload content. We can use their API, and we might do that actually in future. One of the benefits of Chisel is that we can actually write cloud code functions that can actually, do this work automatically with webhooks and join all this stuff up together, which will be really awesome. We could export it and set up or you might already have your content in a CSV file or something. But for now, we're just going to add it manually because I have all this content already in Chisel. And when you click add manually, you get this little text editor, which it just accepts some JSON. So I could go ahead and write some content entries into here, give it an array and pass a bunch of content objects, in JSON format to it. But we're not going to do that, because instead all of our content is already in Chisel, and we have access to all of that content via the Chisel API. So if you have a look, what we want here is our document model. We're not too interested in our sections at this point. So we just want a list of all of our documents. So if we head in here, we click the JSON tab, and this is what we kind of need. We want the table name for our documents model in our Chisel instance, because what we're going to do is use the API to just grab all of our content entries that we have, that we've written in content, in the content section for documents. So to do that, I'm just going to use the Postman REST API client. I need a few things. I need to grab the URL for my parse server instance. I need the correct authorization credentials. So you can get all of these from your, if you're using Chisel, if you're following along exactly to this, walkthrough, you will already have your parse server, master key and your application ID that you can use for the authorization, and then you just need that table name. And finally, you also just need this little query string as well. So in Chisel, the way it's designed is that every content entry has two entries, a draft and a publish. And obviously, we don't need both the draft and publish. So we want to filter and just get the where the status of that item is published. So we only want the published item. So we also add this as well. So a little bit of messing around to do here in terms of just querying the Chisel API, but it's pretty straightforward. And ultimately, the result is that we just want to grab a whole bunch of JSON that contains all of our document content. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to select this entire array. I don't need the top level results, the results object, and just going to copy that and paste that into the Algolia add records box, and then as you can see, it's indexing, and once that's done, all of my content's going to be in here. Algolia sort of, presents all the different fields that are from my content model. So this is all really nice, very, very simple way to get the content in there initially. It works well, for the first time. We'll probably want to automate this, in future, which we can do with Chisel, but that's for another video. And so now you can see, if I go back to the website, I've got this content now available again in my search box after it wasn't there before. And that completes kind of step 4. So for step 5, you might find actually at the point of testing it just then, you may not have any content in your UI. And there was a couple of gotchas that I found, a couple of settings that we just need to tweak. And one of those is the display setting. So in the Algolia dashboard, what we need to make sure is that we are deciding which attributes to expose to be retrieved, so that we have access to them in our template. So you can see here that I have selected the slug, the summary, and the title attributes. That's why I have access to those in my JavaScript template. So the other fields, there are more fields than that in my document content model, aren't exposed. I can't use those in my JavaScript template until I add them here. Okay, so that's an important thing to check. If you're not getting any content through, check that you've actually got those fields set to be displayed. So I'm not going to do a deep dive into all the different settings. We'll point out just like one thing which I quite liked, which is the attributes to highlight. So if we use more than just the title, like the body or the summary, actually if we add these fields, then Algolia will actually add some additional markers, some highlight to those words that match the query, which is quite neat. We can also look at the actual rankings, decide which attributes are going to contribute to the actual search ranking. So here I've added the title, body, and summary. So it will use those fields to do the slightly more intelligent matching of our query to our content. We've got like typo tolerance, which I think is quite cool. How it handles like spelling mistakes and things like this. So lots of cool features in Algolia, really to have a play around with. And so at this point, I pretty much achieved what I set out to do. We now have an active search feature on this site that's pulling content that exists in Chisel into this static CDN hosted website that has no server, no backend, and none of that hassle. So I think we set out to do what we achieved to do. I'd love to hear what you think about the whole process, the setup, Algolia specifically. Anything that you've got to say on the topic, I'm all ears. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We need some more friends here, and I look forward to seeing you next time.